Hi everyone, how's it going? I have a big group of really interesting sounding new books that I want to talk about, and I'm very excited about several of these because some are by favorite authors of mine, so very eager to get to some of them. And I should have more time to read soon because I'm going on holiday for 2 weeks. But the trouble is, it's all a bit up in the air because I don't know where I'm going on holiday yet because we'd originally planned to go down to the south of France and drive there through the Eurotunnel so we don't have to fly. But recently there were rules introduced that if you go to France when you come back to England, you have to quarantine for 2 weeks, and before we go, that might change, but also the rules might change from the French side that once we get there, we would have to quarantine for 2 weeks, which would sort of make the holiday, pointless. So I have a new plan that we might drive through to Italy and go there, but also numbers are rising in Italy as well. So it's all a bit up in the air, and it's difficult to stay in England because a lot of the better places are all booked up at the moment because a lot of English people are just staying here in the country. So yeah, it's all a bit crazy. Although recently I had the test results back from my home COVID-19 test, and they did come back negative finally. It took 2 weeks for me to get the test result back, which was quite a long time because it's supposed to only take 48 hours. So yeah, I was a bit disappointed in that, but it was obviously great to finally get the test results back that it's negative. But yeah, it slightly concerns me that there's that big lag in time. Anyway, I'm going to get to talking about some of these books because, yeah, there's a lot of great ones to get through. First off is a new novel by Edmund White called A Saint from Texas, and I'm always very excited when Edmund White has a new novel out. He's one of my favorite writers. He's a wonderful friend of mine, and I just love his writing so much. And this novel sounds excellent. It's about twin sisters that are born in the 1950s and growing up then, and they're born and live in Texas, and their father has an oil field unbeknownst to him underneath their property, and they go on to live very different lives. So one of the sisters goes to rise to the greatest echelons of Parisian society, and the other one moves to Colombia to live a pious life of servitude, and so it's sort of about their estrangement from each other, but also about the continuing bonds of family through the decades. I think it goes pretty much up to our present time, moving through the story and their lives. And yeah, so it sounds like an absolutely fabulous novel. I'm very excited to get to this. Next is a novel which has been reprinted as a Penguin classic, and that's The Housing Lark by Sam Selvon. This was first published in 1965, and it's about a man who's of Caribbean origin, living in London, who dreams of having his own home. So he and a group of his other Caribbean friends try to purchase a house, and it's about the process of trying to save up and buy a house together and make this dream a reality. But the issues that they encounter with like scheming crooked landlords and also the prejudice they experience as people who come from the Caribbean living in England during that time. And so obviously like housing is still a big issue in London at the moment, and yeah, this is set in places in areas of London that I'm very familiar with, so it'd be really interesting to read about London from that time and compare it to the present day and how things have changed or maybe not changed in some ways. Then there is a new novel by Sarah Moss with an absolutely beautiful cover, Summerwater, and I love her writing, as many people do here on YouTube and talk about. So this is set over the course of a single day in summer in a Scottish chalet park where a group of people, because it's raining constantly, as it does quite a lot in Scotland, have nothing else to do but sit around and talk with each other and look at other people and there's a mother and daughter amongst this group who don't really fit in with the others, and so it's sort of about the disconnect between them, and also the things that come out over the course of their conversation. And I've heard such great things about this book, so very looking forward to reading this. You Will Never Be Forgotten by Mary South. This is a debut collection of short stories about how we use technology in our lives, how some people use it to try to escape themselves and escape their feelings, but then unintentionally reveal who they are and different aspects of human nature through their interaction with technology, and how technology can be both a benefit for genuine connections with other people, but also be a hindrance and has lots of issues come along with it. So I think these are very sort of relevant and topical short stories for our times. Next, I have a newly published play called The Lamplighter, and I don't normally like to read plays on the page. Obviously, I'd rather see them performed in the theater as they're meant to be, but who knows when we'll be able to go back to theaters properly at the way things are at the moment. But also, I absolutely love Jackie Kay's writing, and so I'm always eager to read things by her. And I've read a memoir by her, and her wonderful novel Trumpet, and some collections of her short stories and poetry. She's an awesome poet as well. So she writes in many different mediums. And this play explores Britain's historical involvement with the slave trade, and looking at the voices of 4 different women and 1 man, tracing their lives from Africa through to the time when they were slaves on a plantation, and through looking at Britain through the history of the Industrial Revolution. So this sounds like an excellent story, and also I think the play is meant to function as a tragic choral poem. Non-Combatants and Others by Rose Macaulay. Rose Macaulay was a writer of the first half of the 20th century, and she was a journalist, so a lot of her writing has a kind of political slant, and this book includes a novel called Non-Combatants, and but also a number of pieces of her journalism. So I think that'll be really interesting to read her fiction alongside her nonfiction journalism about that time. And Non-Combatants was one of the first novels to be written and published during the First World War, which was against the war at that time. So she often wrote about the perils of war and the problems of combat during that time. So I think that sounds like a really interesting collection. And this being published by Handheld Press, which publish a lot of really interesting authors who have fallen out of print. Strange Flowers by Donal Ryan, and I absolutely love this author's writing, so I'm always very excited to see a new novel by him. And this sounds like an intriguing mystery. So in 1973, the 20-year-old daughter of a couple disappears and she goes missing, and they eventually assume that they're never going to see her again. But then 5 years later, she reappears with something and someone that just changes the course of their life forever. Very intrigued by this, and he writes so well about family life and the whole psychology and intricacies of that, and he writes so beautifully that very eager to read his new novel. The Gospel of the Eels by Patrik Svensson, and this is a nature memoir about the European eel, which goes through a lot of transformations over the course of its life. It breeds in the Sargasso Sea, and then it swims over to Europe, where it goes through a number of different transformations before finally returning to the Sargasso Sea to breed and reproduce again. And so this is the author's quest to find out more about the life of this eel, and these eels are starting to disappear, so it's sort of looking into why the populations are falling amongst the eels. But very intrigued by this. Then I have another new novel by one of my favorite writers, which is Must I Go by Yiyun Li, and it sounds like such an intriguing story. So it's about an 81-year-old woman who has outlived 3 different husbands, raised 5 different children, and seen the birth of 17 grandchildren. And now at her later years, she finds a self-published journal by an old lover of hers, and she starts to read this and look through it, and sees these clues in it to a past which she hasn't thought of for a long time, and sort of how looking back on that past from a new perspective. So I like the sound of this interplay of different time periods in this novel, and yeah, the whole process of memory and the question of that, and yeah, and I think she's just an extraordinary, insightful writer, as well as like her writing is just absolutely beautiful as well. Frying Plantain by Zalika Reid-Benta. This is a debut work of fiction which is composed of 12 interconnected short stories, and as I often talk about, that's kind of my favorite form of writing, and it's about a girl who feels like she's caught in the middle. So she is born and lives in Toronto, but part of her family heritage is Jamaican, so she's sort of caught between feeling Canadian but also being Jamaican, and so it's about her process of coming of age and growth, and caught between these two different worlds, and so it sounds so excellent. The Death of Vivek Ige by Akwaeke Emezi. This is a novel about a mother who opens her door one day to find the decapitated body. Oop, there's a siren. The decapitated body of her son there. And so then I think it looks back on Vivek's life and his development, his Nigerian childhood, how he has an overprotective mother and a distant father, and yeah, and how he came to this point. So yeah, I'm curious about that. I like the sound of the story, though I felt very ambivalent about Emezi's novel Freshwater, so I'm not sure if I'll like this or not. I don't know. Let me know if you've read it and if you have any thoughts about this. And then finally, I have a book which sounds very intriguing and very unique, which is The Thing Is by Christopher Potter. So this is described as a shape-shifting narrative because it's at once a novel, a prose poem, a work of autofiction, and a confession. So yeah, and it combines all those styles into a fairly short book, and it also begins from the perspective of aliens looking at humankind before moving into the perspective of an ordinary child. So yeah, very unique, and I'll be quite interested to try this and see how it is and how that works together. So yeah, let me know what you think of all of these books, which you're most interested in reading, and if you have read any of them, let me know your thoughts on them, which ones you think I should try reading first, and yeah, but also let me know what other books you've gotten recently and what you're excited to read, and yeah, hopefully I'll be able to do lots of reading on my holiday, wherever that ends up being. So yeah, watch this space and watch where I end up, but I hope you're doing well and reading good things. I'll speak to you again soon. Bye everyone.